Great. Thank you, Ralu.
Welcome, everyone, to the Exploring the Ever-Changing Funding Landscape webinar, a training brought to you by the US NSF Accelerating Research Translation ART program in collaboration with the Office of Research Development and IELTS Venture Development. Today's training is aimed at introducing you to techniques that can help you identify and understand relevant new sponsors and funding sources. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Raleigh Ibekwe, the training coordinator for the US NSF Accelerating Research Translation Program here at UMass Amherst. It is my pleasure to introduce to you all Loren Walker, who is the Director of Research Development at the Office of Research Development, and he'll be leading our training today. Loren, please take it from here.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ralu, and welcome again, everybody. Good afternoon. We're so glad you could join us. I'm going to start with some introductions of the rest of the team here. Okay. So you just met Ralu, and we also have with us Remy Housley from my Office of Research Development has been supporting this effort, and and some other folks who aren't on the slide, but I want to name also as having contributed to this webinar and the previous one we ran last week that Karen Utgoff led, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. They are Lisa Korpieski, Heather Aiken, Julian Lustig Gonzalez, and then my ORD from the IELTS ART program, and then my research development colleagues, Simone Flynn, Michelle Leonard, and Suzanne Tramara. So we thank everybody who helped us put this program together and the rest of the Translational Impact Canvas initiative. I'd also like to introduce my co-presenter, Karen Utgoff. Karen, can you say hello?
Yep. Hi, everybody. You'll hear from me later. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Karen. And I've invited Karen, please feel free to chime in as we go along here, and help us make all the points we want to relate to this group. So one more quick housekeeping note before we really get into it. Just so you know, this is a pilot program, the Translational Impact Canvas. This webinar is a debut, so we'd love your feedback, and there will be a survey at the end. We hope you'll take a moment to fill that out. Um, we're going to do the presentation for about an hour, and then we'll have 30 minutes of discussion afterwards, at which time we'll turn off the recording so you can have a candid feedback for us. There'll be a couple of questions and a poll during the session. Please respond so we can see kind of what you're thinking of. And yeah, as Riley mentioned, I'm Loren Walker, Director of the Office of Research Development, and I'm just thrilled to have you all here today to talk to you about the ever-changing funding landscape. So with that as a preamble, let's jump into it. So this is how it's looked for, getting on almost a century now. This is a 75-year trend of funding for basic research in the United States. The top line, the blue line, is the federal government. The lower line, green, is industry or business. And then beneath that, we have the purple line is other nonprofit organizations like foundations. The orange line is other governments like state governments. And then finally, the light blue line is for higher education, like our university. And so you can see here that we are now, the business and federal government funding lines have grown together. And you can see that now we're at about 40% of the federal funding comes from of the basic research funding comes from the federal government, about 40% from industry. This means that the dominance of federal funding for research, for basic research, has been waning for decades. So this is not a new trend. It's one that's just sort of more present in our lives now. So this brings us to where we are, where the federal government is funding a roughly equal shares of basic research. Now, basic research, we should define our terms, is curiosity-driven research meant to expand knowledge without a specific deliverable in mind. Whereas applied research is that developed for a specific purpose and includes specific deliverables. So this chart here shows how that's changed over time and brings us to the current position again, where industry is funding about 37%, almost an equivalent amount of the basic research in this country. So 20 years ago, if you were applying to the federal government, you were applying to the source that supported the vast majority of basic research in this country. And now that's not the case. The landscape is very much shifting. And of course, that brings us to today, the current state, which is uncertainty. You all know there have been a lot of changes over the past year, a lot of grant cancellations and reductions in funding across all major funding agencies. this slide just shows a couple of those examples. And I only show it here. I don't want to belabor it, just to make the point that, of course, we're living in an uncertain time. And if there's one thing we know going forward, it's likely that this trend of a broader landscape of funders that are more fragmented and less predictable is going to continue and continue to evolve. So perhaps it's fair to say that diversification is an important watchword for grant seekers. And if you're going to be diversifying into different sponsors, it's increasingly important to become familiar with those sponsors, understand where they're coming from, what their priorities are, their expectations, motivations, and so on. And that's a lot of what we're going to get into in the program today. So, as I said, what we're going to cover today is we're going to start with a framework for thinking about different sponsors, what motivates them, their cultures. We're going to look at tools and techniques that you can use to find sponsors. We're going to look at methods where you can use to decide which sponsors may be a fit before you do a really deep dive to understand them. And then methods of both online research and direct communication that you can learn, you can develop to engage effectively with sponsors. And this is part of, I just want to mention here, this is part of a broader program that we call the Translational Impact Canvas. We have some workshops coming up in the spring. We'll say more about that at the end. But this webinar and last week's webinar are a great foundation for those upcoming hands-on workshops, which are really about how to efficiently pursue extramural funding from different sources, even in the absence of a specific RFP. So we'll say more about that later. Sponsors, lots of different kinds. So these are buckets of sponsors here. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Rallo to put into the chat a poll, because we're curious if you'd be willing to share with us who has funded your work in the past or who is currently funding your work in terms of these different kinds of types of sponsors. And then we're also curious, looking at these different types here, which areas are you interested in exploring going forward that maybe you haven't spent much time with? So if we could release that poll, Ralu, that'd be great. Let's take a moment to fill that out, and we'll let you know the results as they come in.
Yeah, so the poll is launched now.
Very good. Thanks, Ralu. I'm just going to continue on. So these are the different types of sponsors across different areas. I would note actually before I leave this that the vast majority of the funding is still carried by these top three boxes: the federal government, industry, and foundations at a distant third. The remaining 10 to 15% span other sources that are small by percentage, but it's still a lot of dollars. So we'll say more about all these going forward here. And it's important, I think, is it's intuitive to know that if you're writing to an audience, you should know that audience and understand their motivations. We argue that understanding the priorities, motivations, expectations, and cultures and norms of different sponsors is really essential to being competitive. This is a list of just some of the things that motivate sponsors. We'll unpack these across the different types in just a moment here. And at the end, we'll have time for Q&A and discussion, and we'd love to hear directly from you about the motivations that you've witnessed as you've engaged with sponsors too. The more we can share that with each other, the more that we'll all learn here. So it looks like as the polls are coming in, I'm seeing that, as expected, most people are getting their funding or have gotten their funding from the federal government, with industry and foundations running roughly equal behind that, and state as a distant fourth. And looking ahead to where people are interested in exploring going forward, a lot of you are saying private foundations, a lot of you are saying state. So that's terrific. We'll get into a little bit of that going forward. And some of you have also indicated an interest in individual philanthropy, venture philanthropy, and crowdfunding. So thank you for sharing that feedback. And I think this is a reflection on everyone's need to be, let's say, an entrepreneurial in this moment and look to other sponsors. And we hope that this program here today and the Translational Impact Canvas more broadly will equip you with some tools and a framework for doing that a little bit more effectively, and we hope efficiently. So let's dig into some more about the motivations of sponsors here for a second. Again, this is our conceptual framework here. So as this slide shows, the top types of sponsor types, the ones that are responsible for most of the supported basic research in the country, they've got a lot of motivations across here. I think you'll find these fairly familiar. Um, I would note it's interesting that the federal government, government sponsors, have the most motivations, and this is not even an exhaustive list. And that made us think as we were preparing for this that I often hear from investigators they may feel like they really know a federal agency or program, and I'm sure that many of you do. But it's a fact that there are lots of motivations, lots of factors, scientific, social, financial, bureaucratic, political, that influence the way that these federal agencies spend their money and invest in research. Now, I would just say, take a minute to contrast that to industry sponsors. Less motivations there. Surely there are others as well, but I think these are the core ones. They want to recruit talent. They want to solve problems. They want to develop products and services. They want to compete and they want to grow their business. So I just thought it was notable that uh, despite the fact that they're less familiar to many, it could be argued that industry sponsors are easier to understand, at least from the point of view of their motivation. Um, so just an observation there. Again, I'd love to talk to you more about about what you know about sponsor motivations at the end of the program. Um, Skipping over to the next group, these are the other kinds of sponsors responsible for maybe 10% of the remaining funding base, which again is a small proportion, but a substantial amount of dollars and growing. And so they're ones to really pay attention to. I just note here, private ventures, we really mean they're investing in startups, spinning out new commercial companies to develop products and services. Venture philanthropy is one that, frankly, I'm just becoming familiar with now. But the idea here is these are organizations that support enterprises of whatever kind is the most effective to achieve an impact goal. So that could be a nonprofit organization, it could be a for-profit organization. The bottom line is they're trying to achieve impact in whatever way makes the most sense, whatever vehicle. And I named the Mulagua Foundation there that one of our investigators brought to our attention as an example of a kind of a venture philanthropy type of organization. There's also individual donors and patrons. Increasingly, these are just individuals, high net worth, that are interested in influencing institutions and supporting causes they believe in. There's, of course, the international multilateral organizations, and there's a role for internal university funding. I hope you're all familiar with the various internal funding programs that the campus offers that can be very valuable to both individual investigators as well as groups. So a lot about motivations, right? But at their core, really, it's important to, I think, call out that there's fundamental motivations that really cut across all sponsors here. They all have goals, right? All sponsors have something they're working towards, something they want to do. And they hope that they will achieve those goals by putting their dollars into innovative projects with capable teams. And they are fearful that they may fall short. And so those motivations, I think, cut through all different kinds of sponsors, and they are worth taking into consideration. I have to credit our colleague Linda Plano, who has done a lot of terrific work working with innovators in higher education and talking about how to basically pitch your research to sponsors and to investors. And she talks about fear and greed. We're going to use hope and fear instead of greed here for the purposes of our presentation. But thanks, Linda, for that. And then, of course, all sponsors have a return on investment expectation. I think it's important to remember. Now, return on investment, I'm using that pretty broadly. Most sponsors that we're talking about that will support your work, they're mostly not looking for a financial return, but they are all looking for some kind of return on their investment, either to change the culture, improve public health, solve a problem, whatever it may be. And they all have some kind of metrics. And so it's incumbent on us as applicants, as investigators, as those who are applying to sponsors for support to really understand, again, the motivations, what their goals are, and what they're expecting as a result of their investment in you and your work. Moreover, there are norms across different cultures. There are different cultures across different sponsors, and those cultures have norms. Um, and they change, they vary across different sponsors. So, for example, scientific conferences versus industry trade shows have a different feel. One culture, like industry meetings, might favor one-on-one meetings, where other scientific conferences might favor networking sessions. Some of these communities are membership only. You can only apply if you're a member, whereas others have open calls. Um, In terms of the processes, things can be quite different across different sponsors and their cultures, right? The way that proposals are reviewed and selected varies widely from anonymized peer panels to board decisions to individual decisions. There are various reporting and engagement expectations. Some grantors, some sponsors may make a grant and expect nothing from you, say perhaps a final report when you're through, whereas others want quarterly milestones and they want to check in regularly. So there are just very different norms across these cultures. And again, these illuminate how the sponsor is going to behave and they influence the way that you can and really should engage with them. So all of these are to say, understanding the sponsor, appreciating that there are different motivations, appreciating that there are different norms, but knowing that they all share kind of a common motivation to achieve their goals and get a return on their investment is we think an important framework.
Yeah, Loren,
Yeah, Karen.
I don't want to break your flow, but I would love if people could put into the chat um, some motivations maybe that they've encountered or some norms that they've encountered that maybe were not as expected as they could as they had that you would assume. So, anything that surprised people or anything that they think is the one norm that they have to deal with or the one motivation they have to deal with. I think it'd be really interesting to go back to that in the discussion later.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, please do. We will leave some time for that at the end, but you can love to capture your ideas in the chat and we can sort of digest those as a collective as we get a little farther down the road. So all these things, right? Sponsors have they're different types of sponsors. They think differently. They've got different motivations, maybe with some commonalities. They've got different cultures. And why is this the case? Because they're all made of people. I'd say, sponsor funding is a human decision. Sometimes we think of sponsors as big institutional behemoths, faceless, nameless bureaucracies, may be true, but they are all made of people. And ultimately, funding decisions are made by humans, and it's a human operation. And therefore, relationships matter. These institutions, these sponsors, are not just big machines that feed on proposals. It's people who invest in people. Um, I would argue that sponsors, I don't think there's an exception to this, don't invest solely in ideas independently. Instead, they invest in people with ideas and plans and the capabilities to deliver on those plans. So understanding people, engaging in relationships will help you more deeply understand the sponsor's goals and motivations, all of which will make you more competitive and are advantageous to your work to apply for funding. I mean, the way that I often say to think about this is when you're working with a program manager, program officer, your objective should be to make them a hero. Give them a project that you want to do. I'm not saying you should change your work or shift your focus just to chase dollars, but what you want to do and present it to the sponsor in such a way that's going to give them exactly what they need to report back to whoever it is they're reporting to about why they made this investment in your work and how successful it will be or how successful it has been, right? They all report to somebody, and you want to make them able to say really great things about your work so they can continue to drive resources in the direction of the work that you want to do. And moreover, relationships, we have to say, are important because sponsors are at some level conservative, meaning that if they're investing dollars in an individual or a team, they need to be sure that that team is going to deliver. And so the more familiar they are with the individual applicant or the team of applicants, frankly, the more confident they may be in your capability to deliver. And so the relationships that you develop with sponsors and program managers can all go a long way to both helping you tell stories that are going to resonate with those program managers and give them the confidence that they know you and they can trust that you will do what you say you will do in the time you say you will do it. So I'd say that that's the underpinnings of this conceptual framework that we wanted to lay out for you. And now we're going to need to, now that we know what we need to investigate through, now I'm sorry, with that conceptual framework, let me back up a step. With that conceptual framework, that's the basis for applying a couple different investigative techniques to find a sponsor, understand a sponsor, and then put together a maximally competitive proposal. So there are two approaches here, competitive intelligence, sponsor discovery. Competitive intelligence is really just secondary research. This is internet research on sponsor interests, priorities, motivations, and we'll talk about, ways to get at that, different sources and things. And then sponsor discovery is direct communication of talking to program managers or foundation managers or tech scouts or what have you. This is about talking to people. So one is, secondary research, reading about reading topics, and the other is, of course, talking to people. And together, these things, the competitive intelligence research and actually talking to the folks that are involved and responsible for distributing the funds of these sponsors, that will generate insights that can be very valuable to your engagement, to your relationship building with sponsors, and ultimately to the development of competitive proposals. So I'm going to say a bit about competitive intelligence gathering, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Karen Uckoff to get into sponsor discovery. So on competitive intelligence, this is about using, we can use this approach to find sponsors and understand sponsors, right? So you can use, of course, these approaches to find relevant sponsors and targets. And we don't just mean searching the grants.gov database, although that's helpful, but we'll talk about different ways and approaches that you can identify what might be relevant to the kind of work you want to do. Of course, this research can also, after you've identified sponsors, help you understand and identify the links between what you want to do and what the sponsor wants to support, what their goals are, their priorities, and their motivations, as we've been saying. This kind of competitive intelligence gathering can also help you decide whether to pursue primary source research, meaning how much time do you want to spend talking to people at the agency. It's good to have a sense of whether that's going to be valuable before you put the effort and time required into that endeavor. And then, of course, this competitive intelligence gathering can help you plan to ask the right questions when you do get the opportunity to sit down with a sponsor. So now with that, I'm going to share a few examples of the way that competitive intelligence gathering can be done to find sponsors and then understand them. So the first one I'd say, and this is, I've been heard this from many, many people. I've seen it effectively used in practice. I talk about this a lot in research and engagement here. And really it's, talk to your colleagues, explore your network, look at the publications of collaborators, of colleagues, of investigators that you admire who are working in related areas. And you can always drill down into those publications and find the acknowledgments and find out where they were supported, what kinds of sponsors and programs recommended, rather supported their work. And that may illuminate other opportunities that perhaps weren't front of mind for you before you did that investigation. So exploring your network is a good approach. Another way, of course, is using various online databases. And in this case, of course, you can use search terms and various ways to find funding opportunities, but I would also argue that it's worth spending some time on the awards databases. These are a couple of federal agencies. You can also do a similar thing with the foundation directory for private foundations, and you can see what these sponsors have funded in the past in areas related to your work. And that can often illuminate which types of sponsors and which programs within those sponsor organizations are a best fit for you. So here are a couple of tools here that you can use. And of course, we'll share these slides afterwards, and those are live links that you can use to explore some of these different tools. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention something about generative AI. A lot of things to say about that. I'll just say this one, which is that UMass Amherst has a generative AI platform, and it is a secure site where you can, and it's been confirmed by our Chief Information Security Officer on campus, that it is safe for using for entering unpublished data or information. Draft proposals, things of that nature can be entered into this tool, into the generative AI platform without risk of disclosure or sharing or risking any kind of competitive advantage you might have. I just want to say one example about the tool that we've developed within the Gen AI platform in collaboration with Professor Pat Flaherty in math and stats, developed a grant prospector agent. And this is still a test version, but what it allows you to do, and the link right there is live. Again, we'll share this afterwards. You can put in a description of your project, either a draft proposal content or a brief description, as well as your CV. And the agent will run a search against the grants.gov API database. So through the API, it'll run a search against grants.gov and turn up some opportunities for you. Now, like with all Gen AI, you have to ground truth the results here and make sure that you're getting valid results. But we found from folks that have tested this new beta system that it has turned up ideas even for new sponsors that they might not have been familiar with before, or even programs within sponsors. So I recommend you give that a look. And then once you've identified sponsors, maybe new ones that you weren't familiar with before, new programs, the next task, of course, is to understand them. And there are ways to do this, and it may seem superfluous to spend time reading mission statements and strategic plans and things, but I would argue that that's time well spent. Once you know which sponsor seems to be the most relevant and most likely to fund your work, it's absolutely important and valuable to spend time reading about them, to understand again their goals, their priorities, their motivations, and their culture. And there are obvious ways to do that by looking at their websites, mission statements. You can also dig a little deeper into annual reports and strategic plans. It's worth doing, and once you've done it, you'll have that knowledge that you can then apply to maximize the relevance of your work when you're preparing a proposal to that sponsor. And then additionally, this understanding here can allow you to match the fit between any particular sponsor or program and what you want to do and your capabilities. Again, I can't overstate that we are not suggesting here you should chase dollars just to chase dollars. You need to do the work that you want to do, but to the extent that you can maximize the alignment between what you want to do and what a sponsor wants to do, I would argue that will make you more competitive. And so this competitive intelligence gathering can be a great tool to help you identify that alignment or determine that alignment and decide whether or not you want to spend a bunch more time doing sponsor discovery, also known as talking to people. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Karen Ugoff to say a bit about sponsor discovery.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks everybody for for making this turn with us. Before I start, Ralu, is it possible to share the results of the poll? I have a button up that says share results. I would love to do that um, if we can. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see this.
I just shared it now.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And what this says to me is that there are uh, a whole lot of you thinking that you're going to expand your experience with funders, the sponsors that you have not interacted with before. And so everything Loren has talked about is how to do the basic uh, research on each of them to get the facts. And now what I'm going to talk about is really how to start to talk to a new sponsor. I've got a button that says stop sharing, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Um, and then hopefully you are now looking at my slide. So you've accumulated a bunch of um, information about a bunch of prospective potential sponsors. Some of them you may have read just the mission statement and gone, never mind, I'm going to move on. But a bunch of them you will have found interesting. And we've developed this short worksheet to help you score them. There will be a version of this that gets sent to you, but the idea here is not complicated. You can take to heart your research criteria, list them on in the leftmost column. You can have more rows than this if you want, but basically get in touch with your criteria as a researcher for sponsors that you want to work with. And then now put that aside and now list sponsor attributes you've learned about. You may have some blank spots. You may have some blank spots in your researcher criteria too. But in any case, you're starting to uh, get a feel for what attributes you see in the secondary research for each sponsor. And so this would be a sheet for one sponsor to evaluate your alignment with one potential sponsor. And then just rate the strength of the connection between your criteria and their attributes. If it's zero, uh, straight down the column, uh, it's not a match. If it's perfect, 30 or whatever, 5 times the number of rows you have, then you know that's someone, that's a group that you want to pursue what we are calling sponsor discovery. And Loren, if you could advance the slide now.
Yep.
Thanks. So sponsor discovery is a fancy word that we have, or a fancy phrase that we've come up with based on the customer discovery model that the National Science Foundation I-Core methodology uses. It's very widely used in the new venture community, especially for uh, uh, research-based commercialization. And the reason is that you don't want to take an if we build it, they will come mentality. Same applies to sponsors. You want to understand their unmet needs, their goals, everything Loren just talked about. And you can get pretty far with secondary research, but you can't really confirm or get the final big picture without talking to people. So we're encouraging you to talk to people, not in a transactional way, but in a discovery way, to understand them and to understand what makes them tick as people who are giving out money, but also giving out money with an end goal in mind. So, first part of sponsor discovery, select the sponsors for primary research based on their alignment. And then know that listening to people who are willing to talk is your main tool. So it's not all that complicated. You're going to use interviews. You're going to use interviews to refute, confirm, and expand on what you've learned from competitive intelligence. There are three key challenges I want to talk to you about. Uh, One is getting people to talk. So it can be real work to actually engage folks. And we'll talk about in a minute about getting a long list together, but know that it is hard work and it's something that where there will be some disappointments, some frustrations. People take a long time to get back to you. People don't get back to you. There are ways to be proactive, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. The next challenge is listening, truly listening. Uh, how many of you in a conversation have been thinking less about what the person is saying and more about what you're going to say next? This can be a huge challenge for all of us in terms of self-discipline and really uh, uh, being attentive to what the person you're speaking with is saying. And then related to that is in all of these interviews, you really have to fight your unconscious bias to hear what you want to hear, because we all want to hear, you're you're great. Please, we want to work with you at some level. And you really have to be very mindful of what they're saying. And we'll get to some ways to do that in a minute. But overall, the goal is to really understand um, the person you're talking to, and you are likely to have to talk to more than one person at many sponsors. So uh, get an idea for how they think about relationships and the language they use, among other things. Thanks, Lauren. So just a little bit more on this sponsor discovery process. You know, you've got an idea of the sponsor from competitive intelligence. You've got a hypothesis about what you're expecting from the sponsor, um, what you're expecting to hear from them, the kinds of relationships you might be able to establish. But now, instead of just assuming that hypothesis is right, you're going to go out and talk to some people at the sponsor and maybe even beyond the sponsor, people who have been funded by them before, uh, people who maybe are reviewers for them, their network. You're going to get data and you're going to learn and revise the hypothesis, improve your understanding of the sponsor. And what you really want to do is iterate a bit until you get to the point where you have a pretty good understanding of the sponsor, and maybe even an idea of how to build a relationship and ultimately to um, to collaborate with them, hopefully with funding from them. So, you want to learn everything from how want to engage with external researchers. How do they define success? Uh, Hopes, fears, goals. How do they define failure? Uh, is another really important thing. What are their unmet needs? Is there a program that, this is the kind of thing where as you talk to them, you might learn not just about what they're doing now, but what they're thinking about doing in the future because there's a gap that they see that they want to fill. And then how do they think about language, jargon? You're going to learn something about the people you're talking to. Are they PhD researchers who are your peers, or are they people who are motivated by something else or have expertise in other areas? So there's a ton of stuff to learn. Next slide, Lauren. So I'm going to just stop to before I talk about pre-interview best practices to see, does anybody have any questions about the process itself that I just described?
No questions yet?
Nope. Okay, I'm going to move along. So before you get to actually talking to people, I am an advocate of really some pre-interview best practices. Be systematic. Make a list of potential interviewees. Know that you're not going to get to talk to everyone on your list. So a wish list, I like to call it, and we'll be providing a version of the form I'm going to share next. But just, this is something you can do as you're doing your secondary research. It's actually part of secondary research. Start to note for each potential sponsor who you might want to talk to. Don't be too narrow about this. Go wide. Um, what if you get to talk to somebody who's an intern who is in their post-award department? There are lots of people you can talk to and just be opportunistic and know that it's sometimes advantageous to start with somebody who's not the very best match for you. You get to practice, you get to learn a little more, so you're better prepared for that interview with the program director that you think is has the exact sweet spot for your work. There are a bunch of ways to request interviews. Um, Ideally, you're going to go through your professional network. You're going to know somebody. You might look at, if any of you do LinkedIn, I know some of you do. Who do you know on LinkedIn that's connected with the person you want to speak to? Um, Mutual connections in other ways. Um, Cold emails, cold LinkedIn messages, all work. But the other thing that works is going up to somebody at a conference and introducing yourself or a trade show. Um, One technique I've heard people use is they look for someone from the organization who's going to be speaking and at a public meeting, and they reach out and say, I'm going to be attending your talk. I'd love to have a couple minutes of your time. And use that to start building a relationship. We all like to hear, oh, I really want to go hear your talk. So it's an opportune moment sometimes. To prepare for an interview, uh, take a minute to review the background information from your secondary research. Take a moment to review the person's biography, uh, educational background. If there's information available, this is not stalking. This is really preparing. Um, know the title they have so that you can ask them in the interview. Can you? I see you are the project director uh, for uh, mitigating, for economic development in Western Massachusetts. Can you tell me more about your job? That's often a great way to start an interview. And develop your hypotheses and goals for learning in the interview before the interview. Okay, Loren, next slide, please. So here's the little interviewee wish list. Uh, I've seen these be multiple pages. It's pretty self-explanatory. Um, let's move along. So now you've got your wish list, you've got your invites out. Um, Now you're preparing for the interview and you're thinking about how to do it, what to ask. I will tell you, the data from I-Corps is very clear that in-person or video interviews are strongly preferred. Um, to voice to voice only is less effective. Email is much less effective. It just inhibits the email inhibits the free flow of conversation. Voice only, it's very difficult to judge whether people are really engaged. They could be doing their email at the same time they're talking to you. But if you're in their office or you're on video, you can really see are they engaged with what you're saying, and are they thoughtful about what they're saying? Um, Ask open-ended questions during the interview, no surveys or interview scripts. I'm always happy to bat around how that works. Uh, I know a number of you have participated in our I-Corps regional program, and I would encourage any of you who can to do that. It's great training for this, even though the focus is on end users of your technology or your research that you're hoping to have impact with. And avoid jargon. You don't know if the person sitting across the table from you is in your field or not, so be really careful about that. Um, Take detailed notes. Opinions on recording vary, but I am firmly in the don't record camp. I want people to feel that they can really be candid with me. And anytime you turn on the recording, people are less candid. Be really careful with the time. You probably don't want to ask for more than 15 minutes, half an hour if it's someone you know. Uh, but it can be uh, great to get 15 minutes and then say, I see our time is up. If it seems to be going well, you can say, I of course have time to continue the discussion if you do, or can we continue it at another time? Lots of ways to do that. And then have some closing questions ready. I'm going to violate my no script rule. The closing questions I like are, what should I have asked that I didn't ask you? Sometimes that opens up a whole new vein of information that is invaluable. And then who else should I speak with? Because it's hard to get interviews with cold emails. And once you're into an organization, if they're if they're a group that wants to speak to you, hopefully the person you're talking to will make some introductions for you. Be sure to send a thank you message. So those are the interview best practices. And does anyone have any questions about these? We'll move along and put them in the chat. We can talk about them later. Remember what I said about unconscious bias. Um, I think that there's a real discipline to combating it. And you've got your copious notes from the interview. Uh, I have seen people take those copious notes, look at them 2 weeks later or a month later, and see exactly what they want to see. It's like those few phrases stand out in blinking neon. But if we reflect on each interview soon after the interview, these are some prompts to start before the interview. You know, make sure you know who you're talking to, their name, their title. If you don't know their title before, you can ask for their title during the interview. But what you want to say complete before the interview is what you want to learn. You'll learn lots more than just that, but have a goal. And then after the interview, reflect on what they said, reflect on what you learned, reflect on surprises. I have had I've had people really, as soon as you say what's surprising, you're sort of pushing back on unconscious bias because now you're looking for surprises. You're looking to for evidence that disconfirms your hypothesis, perhaps. And that's a good thing. And then next steps. What else does this make you curious about? Who else do you need to follow up with? All of those things. So this is not the one and only framework for that, but I urge you to have a framework that works for you. And let's move
Thanks,
along.
Karen. Yeah, thank you. Well, that actually brings us to the end of that segment. So we're gonna wrap up here and just say that so we talked a lot about these different kinds of sponsors and their motivations and their cultures and the fact that there are people behind all these decisions and ways to investigate and the value of spending time understanding sponsors, both by doing your competitive intelligence secondary research and really talking to people. So some themes I think to close it out here, and then we'd love to open it up to hear from you about other motivations that you've encountered in your travels, engaging with sponsors, or any other questions or ideas that came up during this segment. Um, but so there's, as we mentioned, it's ever changing, right? That's the name of this program. The funding landscape is ever changing, and we are in a very uncertain period right now, that's for sure. But one thing we know is that the landscape will continue to evolve. And so perhaps diversification is the watchword for grant seekers. I would also say that of course, finding relevant sponsors is the first step, and we just urge everyone to look around at the landscape and see are there other sponsors that maybe you're not that familiar with that are worth some of your time. And we hope that we've given you some methods and techniques that can allow you to efficiently examine the landscape and home in on some sponsors that you may want to spend some extra time with. So we'd say explore your network, search databases, utilize new tools, talk to colleagues. All to identify new opportunities and then dig in there and try to understand those sponsors as best you can. It's really essential for writing competitive proposals for all the reasons that we've described over the course of this webinar. Using this secondary research and talking to people it takes time. It is work, as Karen mentioned, but it will pay dividends in terms of your familiarity with potential sponsors and your ability to write proposals or other pitch documents, basically, that are going to resonate as much as possible with them. I mean, the fact is that there are always a lot more meritorious ideas and capable people around than there are dollars. And so ultimately, a lot of great ideas and a lot of great teams, individuals get left unfunded. And so one of the things you can do to help increase your chances is to present your work in a way that really resonates with the sponsor and shows that you know who they are, what they care about, what they prioritize, and what motivates them. And that'll come through if you spend some time with this sort of investigation of doing your secondary research and talking to people at the sponsor to discover what they're really all about. And then finally, we want to leave you with a reminder that this webinar today and last week's webinar on Agile storytelling are part of the Translational Impact Canvas program, and we have some hands-on workshops coming up in March and April of this year. And these are meant to take the conceptual framework that we've laid out here today and the one that Karen presented on last week in Agile storytelling and apply those to efficiently pursue extramural funding from both traditional and non-traditional sources, even without a specific request for proposals, which is ever more important in this uncertain world. So I'm going to leave you with just this slide here. It's a little bit more about those upcoming workshops. Those are the dates. There'll be 4-hour programs. The link here is for the application in big air quotes. We just are trying to get a sense for who's interested and why you're interested. And we'd love to work with you on this to apply some of these concepts and really put them into practice. So again, we'll share the slides and you can read more about the Translational Impact Canvas program on our website. And then that's our final slide. Unless Karen has any parting words, we can move into Q&A.
My parting word is thank you, everyone, and please fill out the survey Ralu is going to put in the chat. It's very important for us. This is a pilot program, and we really want your feedback.
Great. So thank you. So I think we could stop the recording. And then if anybody